Welcome to the Art of Adventure. This is 5 Minute Friday. This episode is what I learned from cycling 200 kilometers. Last week was my birthday. I turned 36, and I decided to give myself a challenge, which was to ride 200 kilometers on my road bicycle. Last year, I gave myself a different challenge, which was to cram as much adventure into 24 hours as possible. We were living in Bali, and we went on a motorcycle tour and went glamping and went to some World Heritage sites and went to the site of the magic tree and all kinds of amazing things. That was pretty epic. And these birthday challenges stem from a documentary I watched a couple years ago. I'll see if I can find the link for you guys, about a guy who climbed 40 different climbing routes for his 30th birthday. And I was really impressed that he did that. And I remember his last few routes were done in the dark. So it was definitely an all day long activity, and it was a big challenge. And it's been a while since I've issued myself a personal challenge. You know, I've done some bike racing, and then you're competing against other people. And of course, relationships and moving to new countries and running a business give you all kinds of challenges that just come up naturally. But I wanted a well-defined goal that I could sink my teeth into. And so I ended up riding 202 kilometers, and it took me 9.5 hours. And it was both really hard and not that hard. At any given point on the ride, I was not cycling very hard because I was trying to conserve energy, because I knew that I would have to be cycling all day. But taken all together, it was a really hard activity. And the hardest thing, I think, was wanting to be done after 8 hours and 170 kilometers and knowing that I still had an hour and a half to go, and I still had to either make my goal and push through it or pull the plug and be disappointed. And I knew that I could finish, so I had to just keep going. And I ended up basically riding from sunup to sundown. It was an all day long experience, and I had sort of estimated how long it would take based on the average riding speed that I usually ride, but I didn't take into account that I was going to have a headwind all day long. And then out and back, you would normally expect, oh great, I'll have a tailwind coming home. The wind shifted, so I basically had a cross headwind going out and a cross headwind coming back, which is like riding uphill all day. And it's such an unpredictable thing that it can really get in your head. And so that was one of the things I was battling, was just dealing with the conditions that I was given and trying to enjoy the experience. So one of the questions I kept asking myself was, why am I doing this? I could go for a ride that's long enough to be hard and enjoy it, and still have the rest of my day to do some fun things. And it really comes down to just being curious what the experience is like. Can I really ride for that many hours? Can I really ride 200 kilometers? So for those of you that are American and don't know kilometers, that's about 125 miles. And I've ridden long rides before. I've ridden races that are over 100 miles long, and I've ridden training rides that are over 100 miles. But that was actually a while ago when I was in better shape and I was racing actively. I had only been riding a few hours a week leading up to this event. So it would be all the riding in a typical week condensed down into a single day. And I found myself thinking about other hard things that I had done. I was thinking about the 15 hours that we spent setting the world record for volcano climbing when we did the 3 Peaks Challenge in Bali. We climbed the 3 largest volcanoes back to back to back. And we were basically walking up and down these volcanoes, super steep, for 15 hours. And that was really hard. And it was also a matter of pacing. And you find your second and third and fourth and fifth wind, and you're thinking about things like, okay, keep drinking, keep getting your nutrition in, keep the mental chatter from telling you can't do it. So it's really a mental game, and you might be doing this with somebody, or you might be doing it by yourself, but you probably will be in your head a lot, telling yourself, keep going, you can do it. You're scanning your body. Okay, there's nothing injured, nothing really bad is happening. It's just a long, steady, hard effort. When I interviewed Sean Conway about his records, he swam the length of England, he ran the length of England, he set the world record for fastest cycling across Europe, which is like 5,000 kilometers, way farther. And I asked him, what are you thinking about, minute to minute? And he said, I'm just thinking about keeping on eating. I'm just focusing on keeping my body up and working, like the machine fueled and my mind sharp, so that I don't crash and I don't want to quit. When I was interviewing Brendan Leonard, he was telling me about this week-long trip. He was sort of bushwhacking through this mountain range that hadn't really been hiked in Colorado. And he said that was the hardest thing that he had done. And then he went and did something even longer and harder. And he said each time you do a new hard thing, that becomes the hardest thing you've ever done. And it just puts everything in perspective. So a couple of days later, I went out for an hour and a half run, which I remember when I was first starting to run, that would have been ridiculously long. It would have felt unbearable. And a 90-minute run, after a 9.5-hour bike ride seems pretty quick and pretty easy. And so it's nice to have that perspective. And I was also able to draw on that perspective when I was filming a video course later in the week. And there's some discomfort there, at least for me, when I'm trying to figure out what to say, when I'm trying to make sure that the teaching is really good. It's a creative output, and it can be challenging. And I was able to draw on the experience of doing this really hard bike ride and say, oh, compared to that, this actually feels much easier. So partly it was about, I want to cultivate the ability to withstand uncomfortable things, physical discomfort. That's why I took a bunch of cold showers throughout the winter. And that's why I did this long bike ride. And that's why I try to learn to hold my breath. I held my breath for more than 5 minutes last week. I want to be able to deal with physical discomfort, lack of sleep, moving from one time zone to another, but also emotional discomfort. My friend Colleen Schell, who's been on the show a couple times, says, your success in life is determined by the difficult conversations you're willing to have. And difficult conversations, they're difficult because they often deal with emotions that make us uncomfortable. So whether it's anger or sadness or fear or whatever it is, if you're trying really hard to avoid that, then those conversations and a whole segment of your experience is not available to you. So whatever you're avoiding is limiting you and your experience. So on the ride itself, it was actually a really beautiful day, mid-60s, sunny, and then of course the wind. And I rode from my little surf town that I'm living in Portugal to this national park, which is called Serras del Aire y Candeiros. And it's a really amazing park. A lot of big hills, steep hills, but at the top there's sort of this plateau. This rock has been uplifted, so there's caves on the way up, and then up top they've taken all the stones out of the fields and made these stone walls, and it's very, very much like Ireland. There's sheep everywhere. Really bucolic, very, very beautiful setting, this national park. And I stopped in this town called Alcanege for lunch. We actually took a 2-hour break. Heidi drove out with the kids and brought a picnic, and this town has a castle on a hill in the middle of it. And so we went up to the castle and found this nice little picnic area and spent a couple hours relaxing in the shade, exploring the castle. I got to spend time with my family, and they got to see something cool because it's a beautiful drive to get there, the same roads that I had been cycling on. So that was amazing to break up the ride in the middle. I basically did 5 hours in the morning and 4.5 hours after lunch. One of the funny things that I was amusing myself with was that I was really trying not to stop and pull off to the side of the road and take my phone out so that I could look at the map. Because most of this route was something that I had never ridden before, I knew I was going to have to look at the map frequently. But I would try to always take out my phone while I was riding up a hill so that the speed wasn't too high. So I wasn't worried about crashing. And I would take my phone out and I would memorize the next 5 to 10 miles and okay, right turn, left turn, right turn, uphill, downhill. Okay, great. And I'll go through this town, this town, this town. So as I was going along, I was slowly memorizing the route, and then I would forget it immediately. So, I would pull up my phone, Google Maps, look at the next 10 miles, and then try to remember. And a few times, of course, I had to stop to get my bearings because I had made a wrong turn. There's a lot of roundabouts here in Portugal, and sometimes you might take a wrong turn, especially if the road is bending, because there is no grid structure around here because of all the hills. I had planned to listen to music or audiobooks during the ride, but I didn't end up listening to anything much, partly because of the wind and partly because I really just appreciated being in the experience, what it feels like to be going on this long, hard bike ride in a place that it's unfamiliar, and just feeling that discomfort, but also feeling the joy of exploring, because every bend was something entirely new. So I was constantly getting this, surge of dopamine, surge of curiosity and happiness, and wishing that I had way more time to explore. But I knew that I had to keep moving, and I knew that I had to make it home before dark. So it was nice to have this container, this construct. I knew I had to hit my 200 kilometers. So when I was at 197, I was, counting down the last 3 kilometers. 98% done, 99% done, 99.5% done. We're almost there. Yes, I can go home. So after I was finished with the ride, I asked myself, I said, that was really hard, but what if I had to do it again? What if I had to go out tomorrow and do another 200 kilometers? What if I had to ride even more the next day? The guys in the Tour de France, sometimes they ride more than 200 kilometers every day for a week. They're riding so far. And of course, they're riding much faster because they have the peloton and the draft and everything. But I asked myself, could I do it? And I think that I could have. I didn't. I took the next day off, but I felt really good. I got a good night's sleep, and I never even got really that sore after 9.5 hours and 200 kilometers. So in the end, I'm glad that I did it. It was kind of crazy. I'm not exactly sure, again, why it was so important that I do it. But I wouldn't have had the experience of trying something like that if I hadn't have done it. And I'm really glad that I finished, even though I could have pulled the plug 75 or 85% of the way through. Or I could have gotten a ride home with my wife halfway through. But I kept going, and that's something that's really important to me, is finishing things. Because earlier in my life, I would often stop at 90% of the way done. I actually joke with Heidi sometimes, I'm going to do the dishes, but you're going to need to do the last 5% of the dishes. So getting practice finishing things that I set out to do is really important for me. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that little story about the epic 200 kilometer ride. Let me know on Instagram if you've taken on any personal challenges. What are some of the hardest things that you've done? And check out the video footage on IGTV, Instagram TV. You can see GoPro footage from the first 100 kilometers or so of this ride. And if this gives you any ideas of challenges you could create for yourself or fun things you could do for your birthday, then let me know. You can send me an email, derek@derekloudermilk.com, or message me on Instagram. Thanks so much for joining me. Now it's your turn to go out there and be adventurous.